Memory Assemblages is out. It's here, actually. Um, so it's out at Bloomsbury since last week. So yeah, I thought of saying a few things about the book and things that I've thought since the book was out. In fact, in the last few days. Um, it is an attempt to actually defend what I call spectral realism and defend, and this is done in terms of permanentism. So it's kind of the idea that archives are everywhere. So you start out with archives. So the idea is that the process of archiving and retrieving archives is ubiquitous. So you find archives not only in texts, um, speeches, um, and organisms like DNA sequences, but also you find archives in um, stones, in organic material, and in fact, you don't get just archives. You have an assemblages. You have assemblages of archives that are put together by different circumstances, and um, and then basically these circumstances are exactly what I call addition, which is like a main character of the book. In fact, if you go to the contents, you get after the introduction, you get the principle of addition, and in fact, the first chapter, the principle of addition. In fact, this principle is crossed out because it's not quite a principle that acts as a principle. Then you have the principle of addition. Then the second chapter is diachrony of addition. Then the third chapter is the hauntology of addition. And the fourth chapter is the logic of addition. It follows all that coda where I develop a little bit my idea of a post nihilist Marxism that is inspired by this idea of addition as well, and makes actually an analogy between addition and production, understood in terms of poiesis. But this is a coda, but it's still around addition. So basically, um, what I want to stress here is that this permanentism is the idea that memory, therefore, what happens in memory, roughly speaking, is that you have some kind of archives. For instance, you have the archives of things that you remember, and then you retrieve them. In a sense, you can retrieve them by actually conjuring them, trying to remember them. Like what's the name of, but also memories can come back to you. So these two things happen. So you don't have a control over your memory. That's why, for instance, memory is understood in quite an externalist way, in the sense that I don't have to believe something that something has occurred in the past in order to remember that something occurred in the past. So basically, so that kind of externalism comes handy with the idea of everything we meet are archives, and then of course what we do is we have additions, we have addends, and these addends sort of reassemble things. So that instead of having the original archive assemblages, memory assemblages that we found, we actually act on them by adding things, and by adding things, basically, then we have a new assemblage. So it's the process of kind of archiving and assembling that sort of contrasts, of course, with the picture of, say, substances and relations. So basically, the idea is that that kind of view is not a view that it's not a view that is in line with the project of metaphysics, because the project of metaphysics, say the projects of metaphysics of presence, to make a long story short, is a story of stability and a story of a single time where either things are present, um, as they are, made completely transparent, or the underlying structure that we find is made completely transparent in the present. So basically, you have presences in the present. So that is, the world is conceived by as a as a landscape of actualities. This is the word I kind of use in the book. So basically, this is a break. I mean, the idea of a memory of a world of memory assemblages, of archive assemblages, is a world um, of archives, a world that has a diachrony built in it, because basically archives are built for the future, for future retrievals, and future retrievals are always made on the basis of new addends. And by assembling, you always resort to something that is in the past. So in a sense, the past never stops going through. So therefore, there's the spectral quality of this, because it's really after, it's really like against the idea of an end, in the sense of a finitude, because my way of going like beyond finiture, after finiture, beyond finiture, is to think that, you know, there is no complete forgetfulness, as there is no complete retention. Memory is composed by retention and retrieval. You always have to have these two poles. You don't have a single pole. If you have a single pole, then if you have just retention, basically, to paraphrase Kant's motto, basically, if you have just retention without retrieval, um, you have retention without retrieval is blind. Retrieval without retention obviously is empty. So basically, you don't have like pure retention. Your retention is always, so in a sense, you know, Kant's original motto is in fact a consequence of this interaction between retention and retrieval. It is an interaction to a large extent, even though retrieval depends on retention. There's an interaction in the sense that you have different forms of retrieval that can be associated to an archive, to what is retained. So this idea so this idea involves this diachrony, and in fact, this diachrony is built by the structure of arc of memory and addition. In fact, it is through addends. The idea is that it's through addition that time comes in and becomes operative. The operation of time is an operation of addition. So it's not that time precedes that, but it's just that you need this duality, this this um, this polarity. In fact, you have a bifurcation. You have a bifurcation because you have a bifurcation of time. So the past is present. In fact, the past is present, and you've got like always a kind of projection for the future that's got to do with the idea of like messianicity in the way Derrida works out in Marx and Sons. So basically, this messianicity is the idea that you archive for the future. So you keep this bottle of water for future use. So in a sense, you have this diachronicity, and you have this diachronicity even in perception, because perception is understood in terms of memory as well. So basically, the perceived thing is the archive that you're trying to retrieve, and you're trying to retrieve for based on the addends that you have gone through since the archive was established. So basically, you have these two kind of moments, and in fact, retention and retrieval create two different moments. So this is why presence collapse. The idea of presence is in the present collapse, because the idea of something that is present all the time is the idea of a retention without retrieval. Therefore, is blind. Is something that has no content at all. Because in order to get the content of something, you have to retrieve it. So in a sense, there is no structure that is there once and for all, because you are always hostage of the of the addends that are going to come in. And as they come in, then things shape up in a different way. That could be a very different way altogether. It could be something very similar, but you always have this renewal through addition. So basically, yeah, basically that's an idea. Panmnemism is an idea that kind of extends some ideas that are present in Bergson, but more than Bergson. Interestingly enough, in someone that, in a sense, comes from a non-Bergsonian tradition, mostly, who is Derrida. The idea of deconstruction is key here, because in fact in deconstruction you have this idea that, of course, orphanhood of the text, to use the words Plato uses in the filler, and these words apply to the text. In fact, the text or this book, for instance, is orphan now, because I'm not going to be here protecting it all the time as I am right now. But I'm not going to be protecting all the time, so it's going to be orphan, thrown in the world. So basically, this is what happens with every archive. So this is a key idea to of deconstruction that I think is important from this kind of spectral realism. And in fact, the very idea of spectrality, is a whole issue. The whole idea of spectrality arguably has started from Derrida's Spectres of Marx. Yeah, Derrida is quite important, but I think this is provision that I think is clear, and I've been thinking further in the last few days. What the book makes clear is that Malabou has this criticism of Derrida in terms of criticizing the trace as being something that is established and cannot be changed. It can be deleted. It can be taken into consideration or not taken into consideration, but you cannot reshape it. It's not something that it's not a form that can transform itself. And then there is a form. There's always a form behind the trace, and this is kind of tricky because, of course, Derrida would say that that forms are committed to presence, and Malabou wants to show, and I think she's quite successful in that, that you have a notion of form that is not committed to presence, a notion of form that has to do more with maybe formation, which is a possible translation of Gestellung, this idea that things are changeable, etc. So yeah, I think that's a very interesting criticism, and I think and what I do say in the book is that I want to be neutral about what is the structure of the archive. I don't want to commit myself to the structure of the archive. What I want to have been saying, and that is not quite there in the book, is that the reason for that is that the archive, in fact, doesn't have a structure common to a structure, an inner structure of itself. So the archive can have like a different. You can grab different things in while you're retrieving the archive. So basically, the idea that there is a trace would work out, or there is a form that constitutes the archive, would somehow become like an ontology of the archive. And what I've been thinking is that basically ontology, not in the sense that the trace is being or anything like this, but in the sense that you have a structure of the archive that is there, and then will be retrieved. Of course, if when the addends come in. Now, I want to say that there is no such content. The trace is still some commitment to ontology, some commitment to the idea of retention. The trace is retained independently of the retrieval procedure that comes with addition. So basically, I don't want to commit to this idea. Basically, no. I think there is no such thing. There is no such thing in the sense that there is no kind of structure of the archive that is retained without retrieval. So the archive is really something that is contentless. So basically, you are appealing to the past, and the past is operative in your retrieval, but is operative in your retrieval only in your retrieval. So basically, in a sense, it's like as if like you don't have a contact with the absolute past. The absolute past is forever inaccessible. What you have in memory assemblages, in the procedure of retrieving or assembling memories, assembling archives, what you actually do is to actually this process can be understood in terms of accessing a correlation. You build a correlation, but the correlation here is not between subject and object, or between mind and world. It's actually about the present and the past. You always going to be doing that. So there is a correlation that is structured in the bifurcation, the diachronic bifurcation between present and past, between retention and retrieval. So this is where the correlation is. So if you take this seriously, then in a sense there is no such thing as trace and form, or an ontology. Say an ontology of hauntology. Hauntology doesn't require an ontology. So basically that's why I mean, the idea of trace is very important, for of course, for the that to actually deconstruct the idea of sign, and show things like, for instance, how there is an excess of syntax in the archive. It's always going to be an excess of syntax, but that doesn't mean that this excess of syntax can be spelled out in terms of traces, or in terms of any kind of grammar that is specific to the archive, to any archive. So of course, I mean, traces can be very helpful when we talk about texts. But I don't think you can generalize that, because generalizing that would involve like having a general ontology of the archive, which I don't want to actually commit to. And actually, I think there is no such thing, if we're serious about the idea that you have a bipolarity, you have a bifurcation that you cannot really escape from. So that's why the trace is not such a great idea altogether, because the problem is not really a trace, because I mean, in a sense it works. The comparison I began doing is this: the traces, in the end of the word, in the end of the day, they will work like more or less like actual entities in Whitehead. And I've been arguing that the problem with actual entities is that they have their own thing. They can be replaced by something else, but they cannot be interrupted. They cannot be changed, like structurally changed. In a sense, there is a form to each actual entities, and this is why the actual entities are the ultimate category. Even though they're like traces, they are minimal, but still they are there. Yeah. So in a sense, there is kind of a stability or an ontology behind the process in Whitehead's actual entities, and this is what happens to the trace as well. The trace is really that. The trace is something that even though it's minimal, it's got a structure that cannot be kind of redirected, interrupted, uh, interfered, because it's kind of an atom of stability. A small atom, but an atom of stability. So that's why, for instance, in a sense, we have a temptation to postulate something about the archive that is general, but the idea of memory assembly is to resist that and say, no, there's nothing. There's nothing until you go uh, and retrieve it, because otherwise you're going to have a retention that dispenses retrieval, um, and and you don't want that. So yeah, so memory assemblages. Um, it's now orphan in the world, thrown for future retrievals.